Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR, Here and Now. And this is the fourth part of a discussion we've been having about basically where we came from and how we got here. And tonight we want to talk a little bit about where do we go from here. So briefly, Jack, how do we get here?
Well, who are we? Very briefly. I want to talk and start with the journey of man, not the book, but the video. The video was made at the same time as the book. It's a book of Spencer Wells. His work contributes to our understanding of our human prehistory, has provided an account of the spread and mixing of our human species, Homo sapien, wise human. From its origins in Africa, that is both essentially accurate and accessible. This was written by Richard Leonton, a Harvard University prof of very high status. I want to make the point about this, and this is, again, I suggest you can get the book if you wish, but I suggest strongly that you get the video from PBS. Very briefly, the point about this I want to make before moving on is I have shown this video that accompanies this book, Journey of Man, to my freshman classes at Salem State University for 13 years when I first got it, with great interest and amazement from the students. The first important fact that everyone on Earth belongs to the same human species and not to socially invented different races. On seeing this video, many students would come up to me at the end and say, "Why didn't we know about this before?" And they said this with no guilt and would often ask to borrow the book and take it home. I firmly believe that presentation of these facts to younger students now with an appropriate outline and discussion would have a very positive effect in removing support for racism itself. So that's essentially the point I wanted to make.
Okay.
It's the most important thing I've done on the show to date. If we can start with removing race from its role in introducing racism for hundreds of years.
Well, I think it's very simple that race is a social construct. That's the fancy word for it. A little simpler, it's a fabrication. Simpler still, it's a lie. It's something that's been built into the system, and unfortunately people are depending on it to make judgments. And there is no basis for these judgments, as we've gone through on the previous three shows. You get to the point that we're all the same. We all came from the same place. And yeah, there's a little differences here and there, but they're not significantly different in terms of how we react to one another. They are different in how we handle the environment we happen to be in, but that's all there is to it. And I guess the next issue is, now that we've got to the point of saying that, okay, there are no races, we're all the same, we've got some problems still in this country and the rest of the world. What do we do about them? Where do we go from here?
Good. Brings me to another one I'm going to do rather briefly. It's called Pandora's Seed, and this is also by Spencer Wells. This one has no video, but this one, I have some notes. I'm going to do the same thing I did with the first one. For about 90% of human history, when Homo sapiens lived in a social format called hunting and gathering, that's how we lived. We lived in small social groups that learned to care for each other and to share food with each other. This point of this system was obvious and it's logical. You comfort me and care for me, and I care for you. It makes sense. It was done for 90% of our human history. We lived this way in our human history for about 10,000 years ago, when a few groups living in several locations around the world decided to start growing and farming. This decision has had more reaching consequences than any other change we made. It may not sound reasonable, but this is true. This decision had more far-reaching consequences than any change we made. That the world must now deal today with these changes on many levels of conflict and inequality in between many societies, and growing deeply over years of massive, massive changes that who own excuse me. This dangerous change is finishing up with climate change, which comes about from the great manufacturing in the world now, putting warmth into the air. So Dr. Wells finishes his book with a suggestion that we are now in a critical point in human history. We have the experience and the brains to deal with the problem we set in motion during our change from hunting and gathering to farming. Saving ourselves means accepting our former human nature, not suppressing it. It will mean reassessing our cultural emphasis on expansion, acquisition, and perfectibility by learning once again new ways to care for each other and to share with each other on a new global basis as one global species. The main message from that book.
Well, again, it basically comes down to the fact that if you're a farmer, you're married to the land, and you tend to stay there. And you have good land, there's lots of room for other farmers. Next thing you know, you got a community. It's bigger than a hunter-gatherer tribe, if you will. And as these farms develop excess product, they can sell it. And now you start to develop a different class of people who are not just farmers, but they're traders or they're craftsmen. And you start to develop smaller communities that turn into cities and turn into city-states. And next thing you know, you got an army and you got a government. And I think this is what you're alluding to when you say that there were major changes brought about that were triggered by settling down and farming and how that progressed. And now we're at a condition where we've gone through a couple of thousand years of this kind of environment, and along came the Industrial Revolution. It made a big difference again in how we deal with one another and how we react to the world around us. And you and I can have another long discussion for another show about the significance of carbon dioxide and all that stuff. But basically, we're in a position right now where there's a lot of people that are concerned about the disparity between different peoples. And this is where race sneaks into it. It's really, I think, a problem in economy as opposed to us versus them. And I guess the issue comes down to one of, again, where do we go from here? We've got a system that makes things pretty good. This is, Steven Pinker has mentioned that this is probably the best time ever to live. We've got medicine, we've got health care, got lots of food, lots of good things. Everybody's got a cell phone. What more can you ask for?
Well, you can ask, and Spencer Wells asked, what are we going to do with what is happening? And what is happening now, and what is part of the issue, is that the social and political status that we're in now is not creating enough food. It is not sharing the wealth that's being created. It is creating issues where we are all going to have to face, not all of us, because we won't be here, but we'll have to face what's happening in our society as far as the climate. And this is where I'd love to bring in a film I saw, a video I saw, and it's as important as anything else I choose to say and discuss today. It's called Earth Emergency. Again, from PBS, it's a video. You can get it by if you know how to ask for these things. It's a video of what is happening and where we are potentially headed. Since the industrial age, as George stated, 18th, 19th century, the world has heated up with the release of CO2, methane, and other gases that heat up the atmosphere and causing the ice in both the Arctic and the North Pole to melt. It's melting now, it's collapsing. You can see films of it. It's beginning to melt, which in turn releases gases, CO2, that have been held in the ice for thousands and thousands of years. They were trapped in the ice. As the ice melts, more gas goes up. It makes the oceans warmer. The oceans make the ice melt. The ice melt makes the air hotter, and we've got a circle going. We cannot stop it. And that's what he's saying, Spencer Wells, in the second part of the book. We can't stop it, but we must try and do things collectively. And this is the same reason that this book is connected to the process.
Well, that's the issue of, you mentioned early on in your little dissertation there about the disparity in wealth, disparity in income. This is unfortunately the way the system works right now, that you think about somebody coming up with a bright idea, and they develop this, they start to make a product, and they start to sell it, and next thing you know, they're bought out by one of the big conglomerates, and they're absorbed into that system, and they become bigger and bigger and bigger. And the net result of that is there is a significant amount of money tied up, or a significant amount of wealth tied up in very few people.
Yes.
How do we change the system? What's going to help get this wealth spread around a little bit better so that everybody can play in that game?
That's the major question. And one of the answers, one of the people that has tried to answer that extremely well is, what then must we do? What then must we do with where we are right now? His name is Gar Alperovitz, and I made a reasonably short, couple of statements I took from the book. And I'll try to answer what you were saying, or at least give you some ideas.
Yeah.
Lastly, I want to highly recommend a book focuses on a buildable, workable political system to democratize our wealth and build a community-sustaining form from the ground up. I would like to first state, with a clear, impressive review of this work and what its objectives are. These can be, there can be neither peace nor democracy, nor social justice until we change the system that underplays the American empire and our poorly crippling society. For decades, Gar Alperovitz has been at the forefront of attempts to understand what could lie beyond an increasing broken system of corporate capitalism. That's the point.
Yeah.
It's not our society, it's the system which doesn't work properly. This book is for the most serious and intellectually grounded strategy, by far the most grounded strategy for system changing. And I have some notes here that I did want to mention to you. This is related. It's a statement that's made in here. Our future national and global problems can use this climate change problem as the obvious way to bring all of us together as one global family. Great physical climate problems are coming affecting global society and health and economics of many peoples. They will have to move. New economies must be built to provide health, political, economic opportunities for all human groups. This will probably be the greatest challenge our species will have to confront in our history. Maybe to duplicate our original social format, building and caring, sharing societies. It kind of ties everything together where we're going. And I strongly suggest that the differences in wealth that we have a situation, if you accurately check it, which is what this book, What Then Must Be Do, we have a system where we have effectively anywhere from 20 to 30% of the people living in poverty. We also have situations where you have 400 people at the top having more wealth than the bottom 180 million people. These are things that say the system really isn't working. So what he's talking about is instituting more worker-owned companies, more state-owned like TVA, more farms, frankly. Instead of huge farms, the suggestion was made that millions of small farms in local areas tended to by local populations can actually produce more food, and they'll be local. They won't have to be coming in on ships from China. So it's a society that is caring and sharing, and a society that also, when it comes together precisely in this manner, the people who are making things actually own it. And I think another thing we could do with this is to address one of our classic and terribly embarrassing problems of racism in our country, starting with slavery and all the issues that we had. There are programs in the South now devoted to what Professor Alperovitz is saying and loaning money out to individuals who wish to build stores in neighborhoods that are poor, who wish to build social centers, who wish to build health centers in the local neighborhoods, and who also encourage people to get into, and this is global, into caring and sharing societies, because we all need to come together to solve the global problems. We need to eat, we need to take care of ourselves, we need to live. So this structure he's talking about produces more wealth that goes more directly to the people and does things more locally. He also suggests that countries as large as the United States, which we don't realize it, but it's huge compared to many other countries, we can regionalize. We can regionalize with more effectiveness in different areas of the country where what is made there stays there, or at least is used there. So it's sharing what we can do, and it's not doing some of the bad stuff that we're doing. We're going to have to suffer something for it, but we can invent things to change the society so we can stop the issue from happening. And there was a statement I read and remember for a very long time, and it really was what got me into studying anthropology, because my love was for Native Americans. And I read this statement again in the course of doing work. It was a chief in Seattle who said, "We do not own our land. We borrow it from our children." And this is a Native statement, and it's a Native idea that makes them perform in certain ways, recognizing the value of the land. We don't do that. Our society is to use it as quick as can and raise it as quick as can, do what you have to do, but make the money. So our society is not gifted with the amounts of wealth that we're producing, and we can do it if we own the way we produce it. That's the big end game here. Sharing the means of production with the people, having them own it.
The problem I had reading that book and going through a lot of the similar discussions about wealth redistribution, which really what it comes down to is this a fundamental bunch of misconceptions going around. And one of the ones that I did a little research on between the last show and this was, if you go into the IRS tables and you can find a listing of by bracket how much money people earn, AIG, the adjusted gross income, and how many people are making that kind of money. And you go down through the list, and it turns out that there is a cohort between people who are making $50,000 a year, AIG, and people who are reporting an AIG of $1 million. They gather 71% of the wealth or the income in this country. It's not the top 1% that's got it all. It's that group in the middle class. This is something that got developed as part of the Industrial Revolution. There became a middle class. Everybody didn't have to be a serf anymore, working the farm for the local noble. And it's worked out very, very well for a lot of people. So trying to get a change to something else, you've got to come up with a stronger message that it's going to be better than just simply, well, we need to do something about it. And this is where I find a lot of these discussions become a little bit soft when you get into the details. You mentioned the 400 people that are very wealthy. Again, I looked up the Forbes 400, and they have an income, or they have a wealth, accumulated wealth, of something like $4.5 trillion between everything they own. You look at this federal government, and our budget every year is about $3.8 trillion. So if we confiscate all the wealth of this Forbes 400, you can run the government for 14 months. And then what do?
You don't do that. You don't confiscate
No, but I'm saying this
wealth.
is the point. And the other half of the game is they have their wealth tied up in stocks, bonds, properties. Who are you going to sell that to get that property converted into money? So there's a lot of loose ends that bother me.
Okay. It's a system. It's a system that starts by people owning the businesses. And as I suggested, if you started in neighborhoods that didn't have this, where people have to get on a bus and go 5 miles, or they have to get a taxi because they don't have a car, and go to places where they can get market food. He's suggesting starting businesses in these communities, minor communities, poor communities, and the government would start the business and would put people in there that own the business. So they'd probably have to get some training as well.
Yeah.
But they would own the business, and they would own what profits come out of it, and they live in the same neighborhood. So you're sharing monies now by building things that are owned by people, and they make the money and they use it. You don't have situations where you have people making gigantic amounts of money, and even in the stock situation, there are many people, the stock system doesn't pay on everything they make. You have huge amounts of money on which you don't have to pay taxes because the system is manipulated.
Oh, yeah.
So if the people own the businesses that are creating the materials that are being used, and are owning, and jointly, not personally, but jointly, owning the land on which they're growing foods, you have a situation where you do have a democratic society that really works. And you have a system where everybody will be paying less taxes because the wealth is being shared. So it's a deeply complicated, but it's also doable, and it's doable because there are areas where this is happening in our country right now. We have situations like this that people don't even recognize in many states, where people do own what's going on, where the state runs situations, farming, health, education, food control. These are situations that Al Perovitz is suggesting people get involved in terms of ownership and sharing.
But this is exactly what we've just got out of. I mean, you go back to 1800s, everybody was living on a family farm.
No, sir.
Yeah. 90% of the people were working on farming. As farming got mechanized, as farming got mechanized, people left the farms and went to work in the factories. And this got to be a problem where the cities got to be bigger and bigger. And as we've been talking about, there are sections in the cities where people aren't doing terribly well. And we've gone through this whole system of what you're talking about is essentially a mom and pop store in the neighborhood. I can remember having them when I was growing up. They're gone. And they all went to the mall. And now the malls are shutting down because everybody's buying from Amazon online or Walmart online. Everybody's got an online.
Yes.
So we've gone through a transition to go away from this system. What's going to turn us around to go back?
Go back to the system that we had.
But why?
That shared the wealth, because it shared the wealth that people were making.
They weren't making that much. That's the problem.
Yes, we would. Yes, we would. If you figure out what's happening in here, the same materials are being made, but they're distributed. And the people who make them are making more fair wages than they do if they're working in factories or in Amazon. The wages in Amazon and the changing rate of people who work in Amazon is immensely high because it's a terrible place to work.
Well, right now, unfortunately, we've run through our half hour, and your turn to close it out.
Thank you. Well, I haven't heard of a better system, and it's a system that duplicates caring and sharing. Now, how you get to that has to be figured out. There's no question it's not for perfect out there. But a caring society, and I'm talking about a global society, and a sharing society, is one that can help us with our major problems and with our problems we have as a society, our political problems. Everything is not, the world is not run on a deficit situation. It's really a sharing situation. So we have to make arrangements, and Alperovitz has a system, if you want to see, where people have a greater share of what's being made, a fair share of what's being made. It's one way to do it, and it's really what he calls democratizing wealth and building a community-sustaining economy from the ground up.
Okay. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And as we publish in the credits, if you've got a different opinion and would like to have your voice heard at the table, send me an email and we're glad to have you. And thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you later.